Okay, so the agenda for this session is here we are going to see how to build a web API in ASP.NET Core with the CRUD operations into it. And then we'll see how to use React with Redux to create the form design by using another theming framework built for React, that is Prime React UI. And then we'll see how do we consume the web API from the React and Redux application, and ultimately the implementation of the full application and testing the application is what we will see at the end. So basically, we first need to know why the frameworks like React or React Redux are required. These are all client-side frameworks, right? So why do we actually require the client-side processing where we already have some powerful server-side technologies already in place, which provide us pretty structured way of programming your application with the help of the frameworks like ASP.NET MVC and all. We can actually create very, very powerful applications. So why do we need the client-side support? Yes, anybody?
For view rendering, because otherwise all this view rendering and processing has to be done on server side, so to offload that task to browsers.
Correct. So probably this is where we look to change from one screen to another based on the user interaction with the application. And with the conventional technologies which are server based, the request has to go to the server and server has to render the view and send it back to the browser. And between these round trips, a lot of time gets consumed and the overall responsiveness of your application becomes a challenge, because many times if the internet bandwidth is also low, the time taken to re-render your views also is very high. And these days people feel irritated with such kind of delays, and that's where we look for the change is happening right at the client side by sending the request only a request to the server only in case where there is some information that needs to be taken from server, and most likely this information is nothing but the data that you bind to your views and display into the views. So this is the reason why we go for the client-side implementation, and it all starts with the typical JavaScript-based code that we can write on the client side, because that's the only language that browsers understand across the world. Am I right? Okay, so I assume that's accepted. Here, JavaScript is something which we have to use for any client-side implementation, because as I said, that's the only language which browsers across the world understand for providing some interactivity into your application and taking actions based on the user requests at the client side. HTML or CSS kind of languages cannot do the similar thing, because they are not the programming languages as such. They are just the data representation and formatting languages respectively. For adding some life to your application, we use JavaScript. Now, writing the code entirely using JavaScript requires us to work with the complete document object model of your HTML pages from within your JavaScript, and that code becomes pretty lengthy and not very easy to maintain and manage. Again, with complex application requirements, the lengthy code can introduce its own issues over there, where the complex code itself might have some of its own performance issues as well. So that's where the developer communities across the world came up with different libraries and frameworks built on the top of JavaScript, which allowed some regular operations which we expect from any line of being, or I would say being provided out of the box. And we just focus on the application specific logic from our end. And that's where basically the libraries like jQuery, the frameworks like Angular and React basically come in. Now, React becomes very popular these days because of its speed in terms of rendering the UI. The reason behind that is React uses the virtual document object model merges with the physical DOM. That makes it pretty faster compared to that of the other counterpart libraries or the frameworks which we have. So in fact, I've seen multiple applications now making use of the Angular framework for providing the MV star structure as far as the business logic is concerned. And when it comes to the rendering of the views, people are making use of React on the top of Angular as well. So that's what the importance of React is. And then Redux makes available some more additional features to your React framework, which makes the entire communication with your backend services pretty fast and pretty optimized and pretty organized as well. Because if you are writing the application entirely using React framework, once the complexity of application starts increasing, the React code also becomes pretty unmaintainable, and that's where Redux makes the entry. It comes with some kind of components which basically are again providing some automation to provide the support for the complex operations that your application is required to do at the client end. So that is where React and Redux combination is getting some popularity, and that's the focus area of our today's session is. So let's begin with the implementation straight away, because this session is not about learning React from the scratch or learning Redux from the scratch. It's more focused on having the hands-on session on implementing the CRUD operations using React and Redux with the help of ASP.NET Core Web APIs. So let's start. Here I go to Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 2019, and this is how the start screen of Visual Studio 2019 looks like. This is my choice of the editor, but it's not mandatory that you need to have the Visual Studio 2019 used for working with this kind of application. You can use VS Code also. You can use any code editor for that matter. Again, it's not mandatory that your backend server-side web API needs to be implemented using .NET Core. It can be implemented using any other technology like Java or PHP or Node.js or anything that you like. For this particular example, I'm going to use .NET Core Web API, but that same Web API you can replace with any other technology of your choice. So let's start. In my case, in this particular demo, I'm going to use the same project and the same host to actually provide the Web API along with my UI application to keep the thing simple. Otherwise, probably we need to enable the cross-origin resource sharing policies for the Web APIs if the applications are two different applications and hosted on two different servers. So making them hosted on the same server will not require this CORS policy to be set at all, and hence my choice is going to be the same project. So I start with a new project. Herein, I have three drop downs for filtering out the kind of templates which are visible in this section, where I select the server-side language as C#. I'm looking for a all platforms based implementation. Basically, the open source version of .NET I'm going to use to create my web API, that is called as .NET Core, and the .NET Core applications can actually work on any platform. So I choose all platforms over here, and In the third drop down, I select the type of application I'm looking to create, which is web. So I select web and I can see ASP.NET Core Web Application Template straight away into this list. I select this template and click next. Need to give the name to this project. I'll name this as RX underscore demo CRUD using React and Redux. This is the location I'm going to put my project at, and let's click on create. I'm sorry. Here I select .NET Core as the framework and the target version. I'm sorry. There is some dust actually here, so I'm having issues. Anyways, so .NET Core is the framework and the version that I'm going to target as of now is .NET Core 2.2. You can go with .NET Core 3.1 as well. The only difference you will find there is the template for ReactJS and Redux will create the entire application based on TypeScript, and with .NET Core 2.2 it is going to be based on vanilla JavaScript. So as of now we will be using this template because with TypeScript you need to have some understanding of TypeScript language as well. That's why I'm selecting this template. Let's click on create. And the application is ready. It has created some sample React Redux stuff also. You can see I have some pages component over here. I have some controllers thing over here, which has got a sample controller by the name sample data controller and returning some weather forecast information from here. This is my sample web API create based on the model that is weather forecast. So what it is going to return is the date, the temperature in Celsius, temperature in Fahrenheit, and the summary regarding the kind of temperature being represented over here. Based on that, the summary is going to be returned. Like if it is very negative kind of temperature, it will be freezing, then bracing, chilly, cool, mild, warm, and so on. And then here you can see there is a folder already created named as client app, for which behind scenes the command create react app has been used by this particular Visual Studio template, and which has set up this client app folder, which contains all of my React stuff, wherein the startup page index.html is created, wherein all the React stuff is going to be injected. And then here in the SRC, that is source folder, I have some JavaScript files where I have index.js, which represents my home page, controller for the client side index.html. This is client side controller, I will say, and which creates the instance of the app class. This app class is represented by this app.js, which actually is setting up the routes that are going to be used in my application. So I can see some default routes already configured, and then I have some components over here. These are all React components which are actually performing certain kind of actions that will generate some UI that will be rendered as the part of this index.html and providing the single page application behavior, where the page is loaded once only and the view based on the data changes just keeps on replacing. So I have fetch data. This is for weather forecast stuff, and I have counter.js. This is basically just a sample React component generating some data at the React level itself. It is not interacting with any backend service which is running on the web server. And then we have something called as home.js. This is the basic UI generation stuff that we have. And then we have layout.js, which is actually setting up how my UI actually is going to look like, just like a master page. So I have something called as nav menu, which is going to generate the navigation bar. And then I have container in which all of my content is going to be injected from the various components that I'm going to create here, like counter or fetch data or whatever I create later on. I have the application level CSS also, which is based on Bootstrap. So by default, Bootstrap has also been included here. And here comes the nav menu, which basically represents the UI generation for the navigation bar that we will see. So to test that this application has been set up correctly and this is going to work for us, I'll just hit Control plus F5 key combination on my keyboard to trigger the build activity and get my initial home page rendered into the browser. Control F5 basically is run without debugging. This is an important activity that we are doing here. Once the project initially is set up for you, whether using create React app on the command line or by using any application template in any code editor, you should always go and build the application and test the application initially to see that the overall scaffolding has been done and set up properly for you. Because otherwise you will end up writing a lot of your application code, and if the template itself had some issues, maybe the template has broken, your code will never be able to run, and a lot of time gets wasted in fixing those issues. So it's always better that the initial scaffold, if we check it before writing the single line of code further, is going to save our time. That's why I said it's better. So here it gets compiled and launched into the browser. I can see the home page being rendered. Kind of feature the template has given me as a sample. And then I have fetch data component, which is actually interacting with the backend service, that is weather forecast. Also across different, and here this view has been generated with the help of the data table component for the React UI. And that's the similar thing that we are going to use, but a more advanced version of this data table we will be using, which will allow us to click the headers and get the sorting features enabled for this, and editing features, inline editing features enabled for this and all. And for that, we are going to use a separate component, that is Prime React UI. So let's close this page, back to the Visual Studio. And now what I'm going to do is build the web API, first of all, that interacts with the backend SQL Server database table, provides the basic CRUD operations. We'll build this API first, we'll test this API at the basic level, and then we will be working with the UI part, which will be implemented with the help of React and Redux. So for this purpose, I already have a database created on my local DB instance. Within that database, the database is named as company DB. Within that database, I have a table already named as departments that has got 3 columns: department number of type integer and a primary key also assigned. and then dname and location both of type and varchar size 50. And some sample data also I have added already into it. So I say shows table data and it shows me the sample data which is available here. This is the table we will be operating with. And for that purpose, I'm going to use entity framework feature of .NET Core. So for that purpose, what I do is I go to the Solution Explorer, right click on the project, click on Add, select New Folder. Let's name this as Models. That's the right way because backend is all driven by MVC in .NET and we are just following the structure of MVC programming. So I right click the Models folder and say Add a class which will represent my model data of the application. I name this class as department DPT, which will be mapped to the departments table over here in the backend. For the mapping, I will need some annotations, and for that, I'll make use of a couple of namespaces here. System dot component model dot data annotations, followed by system dot component model dot data annotations dot schema. Here I use the first annotation on the department class, that is table, with the name going in as DPTS, as my backend database has got the table by the name DPTS. So I map it by the same name, and then I create my properties. First is int department number, second is string dname, third is string location. Now, because the names of these properties and the columns in the backend database are matching, I don't need to do any explicit mapping over here. Just that I need to provide some attributes which will represent the same characteristics of that particular property as that of the column. So we can see department number is a primary key in the backend. The application level also I put the attribute as key, which makes it a primary key or behave like a primary key, and I also make it required. Just for the readability, because key by default imposes required behind scenes. So required attribute is not required explicitly, but I feel this improves the readability. There is no question whether the key imposes required attribute by default or not. As I've put required attribute here explicitly, it's required. Then dname, I'm looking for a mandatory field. So again, here also I put the required attribute along with the max length attribute being provided to set the maximum length to 50, as in the backend system it is set to in varchar 50. And here location also is max length 50, and it's not a required field. This can be left blank and can be entered later as well during an update operation. So I save this, close this tab, and then the first thing I would require is to install the entity framework for this .NET Core application. For that, I go to the Tools menu and select NuGet Package Manager console. Here I clear the screen to get rid of all the basic information coming up, and here I say install package Microsoft.entity framework core. This will install the latest package, but it will not be compatible with .NET Core 2.2. Hence, here I am going to add the attribute version to make sure that the framework for entity framework core also is targeting .NET Core 2.2. So here I say version is 2.2.0. fully compatible with the current .NET Core version we have selected. If you are working with .NET Core 3.1, version attribute is not required. It will take the latest version which is compatible with .NET Core 3.1. So the entity framework package is installed. The next thing I need to do is again go to Solution Explorer, right click the models folder and say add another class by the name of my database, company DB, followed by context as the suffix. A namespace required to be imported, which represents my entity framework. In fact, I should have installed entity framework core. I'll just uninstall this package. I'm looking for entity framework core based on SQL Server backend, as entity framework core can interact with any backend that is required by the application. I'm precisely looking for SQL Server. So I uninstall that entity framework core package installed earlier and replace it with Microsoft.entity framework core.SQL Server, which will automatically install entity framework core, but then which is based on SQL Server. It should be installed.
I have a question here. What
Yes.
if we don't use the .SQL Server and just the entity framework core? Won't it be able to communicate?
Yeah, in that case, it will not actually create the provider, or I would say it will not install the provider for SQL Server by default. Only the in-memory database provider will be installed. If I put SQL Server in place, it will install the SQL Server provider behind scenes.
Got it. Got it.
Got it?
So depending on the database type,
along with that,
import.
Yeah, correct. So here I will now say Microsoft.entity framework core. And there I say this class company DB context inherits from DB context. And then first of all, I need to create a property over here which represents a collection of the department data. So here I say prop tab. That collection which will be represented here is DB set class, which is a generic collection class. I will pass department as the type parameter, which makes it a collection of department, and I name this property as departments. I create a constructor here. First one is default parameterless constructor that changed to my base class default constructor, and then followed by another overloaded constructor here with a parameter of type DB context options. Name this as options and change this to the base class parameterized constructor that takes in DB context options. So again, I pass the parameter options as it is. Nothing required to be initialized into the current class constructor. It is just that whatever the request that is coming from the user has to be passed on to the base class constructor as is, and that's the mapping we have done over here. And I just get this tab also closed. The first thing now I will do is open app settings.json file and create an entry for connection string. It's better to retrieve connection string always from the config files rather than hard coding it at the application level. Am I right? So here goes connection string represented by another JSON object. So curly brace, and then the key value pair representing the connection string this application is going to use. I put the key value as CS and the value itself as the real connection string that represents my database connection. So I say server equals to local DB // MS SQL local DB semicolon database equals company DB, and I'm using Windows integrated security, so I'll put integrated security equals to true, so that my current logged in user for the Windows will be used as the login account for SQL Server as well. Save this and close it. Now let's open the startup.cs file. And here, just before this .add MVC method being called under configure services, I will register my DB context class as a dependency into the IOC container represented by iService collection. So here we go and say services. In fact, before that, we should implement the import statement for the models namespace, which is there available as the nested namespace of our project namespace. So import the models namespace, and then I say services dot add DB context, which is a generic method where I need to pass my DB context class, which is named as company DB context. And then into the method, I need to pass a lambda expression to satisfy this action delegate to have the dependencies of this DB context itself set, where I say that, okay, use the SQL Server provider behind scenes. So I say options goes in options dot use SQL Server. For this reason, we have used that entity framework core.SQL Server. And here I need to pass the connection string. So two choices, I can pass hard-coded connection string, or I can retrieve from the config file. We have given in the config file, so we'll retrieve from there. And for that, we already have the property called as configuration that allows me to read app settings.json. So I can say configuration get connection string and the name of the connection string I need to pass here. I'm sorry. Here I pass CS. And this is what we have given in app settings.json here. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is done. Sorry. I'll just save this and build the application once. To see all well, and also generate the compiled code for whatever we have created so far, as the scaffolding tool that we are going to use next depends on the compiled code rather than the source. So it says build succeeded, that means all well. Now I need the controller for the web API to be built, and for that I go to Solution Explorer, select the controllers folder here, right click the controllers folder, add, select controller, and here out of the 6 templates I'll select API controller with actions using entity framework, as our backend has been built on entity framework. Click on add, then in the resulting dialog it is asking for the model class, which I'll select as department. The data context class is company DB context, and then the controller name it is representing here. Usually I prefer to give the suffix as API controller to all of my web APIs for our better understanding. So I say department's API controller is the name and say add. Though it's not a mandate, just for the better readability, I prefer using API controller as the suffix for all of my web APIs. It is also installing some NuGet packages which are further required to make the entire scaffolding operation work successfully and get our code generated. Okay, it says there was an error running the selected code generator to scaffold controllers and views using models. Please install Entity Framework core packages and try again. Most likely, the first one is the culprit as SQL Server we have already installed. Usually, this error will not come. Sometimes it comes if it fails to communicate with the server for the NuGet packages, and you just need to choose the missing package and you have to install it manually and then do the scaffolding again. So it is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Design which seems to be failing. As SQL Server we have already installed. So I'll just say cancel, 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 and go back to Package Manager console. And here I'll say install the package Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Design. Done. And same steps I'm carrying out like before. Click on add. And this time there is no problem at all. Right. So that package also gets installed in automated fashion if your network bandwidth is good. Sometimes if network bandwidth is low, you may face this issue where you have to install some of the packages manually and then the scaffolding works smoothly. So it has created my API controller, departments API controller, which already is creating the instance of company DB context class, instantiating it with the help of the dependency injection based on the constructor. We have already registered it over here as a dependency, right? So it is just resolving that via constructor and initializing this context object. And then with the help of this context object, it is providing me certain operations like get departments, returning the list of departments, get department by ID, returning one department at a time based on the given department number. Then put department is for update activity, post department is for create activity, and delete department as per the name is for uh, deleting the department here. Now, here I'm going to make certain changes. So before that, I just want to make sure that this API is working for me. And for that, I just say Control F5. We'll stop the loading. And here after the base address, I just put API slash departments API. If it gives me the department data in JSON format, my API is working properly. And we are getting that. Any questions so far?
Here in get departments, we return the list of
Yes.
departments. So what is the
Yes.
HTTP status code here?
It will be HTTP status code. Okay, that is 200.
200. Okay.
Yeah. And again, if you see get department, if it is not found, we are explicitly saying return 404. Otherwise 200. Okay. Port department is saying 204 if all well. Bad request, that is 500. If the ID and department number are not matching, these days editing the primary key is not allowed. That's why by default the code is generated like that. And then if all well, then it will be 204. Okay. And again, if concurrency exception comes, it checks and finds if department has been deleted, it returns 404. Otherwise, just throws the concurrency exception back to the client with 500 series status code. And then the post department will return 201 successful creation, and delete department again is 203 or something. So this time here it is going to return okay by default as per the code, as we have not explicitly said return 203 or something. So the changes required are, yeah, any question?
No.
Okay, so the changes required are, first of all, I'm going to remove this HTTP put function from here, as I'm going to merge the edit and create activity into one single function, that is HTTP post. So here the modification comes actually into HTTP post, where I first of all get this statement context.departments.add department, cut from here and introduce a if statement wherein the condition is if not department exists, which is a helper method created downwards that checks for the existence of the given department. I say department.department number is the field on which the existence needs to be checked. If not exists, that means I want to add a new department. If already exists, I want to edit the existing department. So here goes else block for edit operation, wherein I say underscore context dot entry for the object department coming as parameter dot state property is set to entity state dot modified, and then I say save changes, because whether it's a new department or modification, save changes has to be called so that the database can be synchronized with the changes which have happened in the local collection on the web server. Rest everything remains as it is, and our web API is ready. Any questions so far regarding web APIs? Let's test this web API once more. After making the changes, see if it is still working. So I put the request and I'm able to see the JSON data for existing stuff. That means my web API is up and running without any issues. I close the browser, back to the Visual Studio, and now it's all about implementing the React stuff. Now, first of all, I just close this first tab, Departments API Controller. Let's have a look at startup.cs configuration. Some support for React stuff has been added here. We can see in configure services, we have services.add sparse static files. That is the dependency added to support the static file processing, where the static files are going to be represented as HTML, CSS, JavaScript files primarily. Okay, images also might be the part of this. So we are setting the root path where the static file content is there. So client tab build folder is what will be used in the production, and then this middle this dependency needs to be configured at the application level somewhere to be actually utilized, and for that we have a middleware component being configured with the help of use PAR method, where we say the source path actually is client tab folder, which contains the entire client side stuff, and then we are setting up some additional features like if I am in the development environment, use the React development server so that the hot editing or hot loading I'm sorry, is going to be possible. And what is the advantage of that? If you make any change in HTML, CSS or JavaScript, you need not restart your web server. You just save the changes and your React development server picks up the changes and reloads that view automatically without you needing the refresh button to be pressed. So that actually helps us a lot in terms of enhancing the development speed. Let's close this page, and now our focus shifts on, in fact entirely on, this client tab folder, which represents all the client side stuff. So we have to do something similar what the sample has been built for us. Fetch data is communicating with that weather forecast service and all. So we have to actually replicate something similar. We will build everything right from the scratch though, so that we understand each and everything, how the components are built and configured. So the first thing which I'm going to do here is, there is a folder called a store that represents some JavaScript classes which ultimately represent the state of your application or the state data of your application. So like if I open configure store, it is all about the configure store class that holds the value for your counter and some configuration, or I will say the code which drives that particular code. Similarly, we have weather forecast class, which contains the interaction with the web API also behind scenes, and then modifies the state of that weather forecast component. So here I need to have a similar component created for my applications required data, which is department. So I right click on the store folder and say add new item. Here I'll select ASP.NET Core, expand it. Here I expand web, and in that I select scripts so that the templates get filtered out only for displaying the script related stuff. I'll select JavaScript file here. If you're working with .NET Core 3.1, these all components will be created as TypeScript components, and then you will be adding the TypeScript JSX files. I name this as department.js and say add. It's entirely empty JavaScript file. One by one, I need to put in my own details. So let's start by defining a constant which will represent the initial state of my application. There is a constant named as initial state, which is set to a JSON object. This JSON object contains the first field by the name departments, which will be an array, JSON array basically. Then there is a property called as loading, whose initial value is false. Then I have errors property, which will represent any errors encountered at the application level for this component. So initially there is no error, so I just say it's an empty JSON object. And then I have another property called as force reload. State changes, force reload needs to be set to true. If there are no changes, it remains false. So default is false. And this is my first implementation here. Save. Then I need to create an exportable component that is accessible throughout my application. So I say export const something called as action creators. This is all Redux stuff. Set to a JSON object wherein there will be methods created that will be interacting with my web API. So these are something like client-side controller actions, okay, represented by action creators component. My first action is request. That is actually a method. In JSON, how do we represent that? Parenthesis, holding any parameters being taken by this method. As of now, I don't have any parameters, so I just have empty parenthesis pair. Arrow function I'm using, which is similar to lambda functions in C#. I want this to be an asynchronous operation, so I use async keyword. ECMS script 6 basically has got the support for asynchronous programming. So that gives me async keyword. Say I have a couple of parameters ultimately for async operation, dispatch and get state. Get state will read the state, and dispatch is basically to update the state to the UI. We call it as dispatchers. And that itself is ultimately another arrow function. A curly braces, and there I say I have a constant named as URL, which will represent the URL of my API, which is API/departments API, the same thing we put into the browser. Then I have another constant named as response that will capture the response of the web API call. So here goes the API call. I say await fetch. It's a JavaScript XML HTTP request based function that makes the AJAX call to your web API. And that's why I need to pass URL as the parameter to fetch. This will be based on the promise framework that we have now in JavaScript with ECMS6. What it does is whether the call is successful or failed, you will always have a response back at the JavaScript, and that response will let me know whether it was a successful call or a failed call by checking the status codes and all, right? And if I'm expecting some object, if there was a failure, that object will come as null instead of just the exception coming back. So that gives me more control on the code, and that's why I'm using this fetch keyword, fetch method. Now I want from this response the department's data to be retrieved. If it has failed on the server side, it will be null. If it has not failed, it will be actual departments array. So I say const departments equals await response object that we got in the previous state dot JSON, because the response will be HTTP response object. I want the JSON representation from it. I call the JSON function on it, and it gives me the JSON formatted data or JSON object. And then I call the dispatcher method. So here I say dispatch. For rendering purpose I need. And what I want to dispatch is some data represented by departments for a type registered with Redux by the name specified by this type, fetch underscore departments. Comma payload, that is departments. a callback happening here. Now this is request departments. I need to have save department method, which will be handling the insert and update operation. I say there is a parameter department that goes in the async operation, which again takes in dispatch, get staked as the parameter. That ultimately goes in to this method body, where I say there is a constant URL, which is actually same as this, so I can copy this. This time I'm going to send the post request, so I will need headers for the request type. In HTTP terminology, we call it as content type, or we represent it as HTTP header called as content type. So I'll create the headers object. Headers equals to new headers. And then here I can say headers dot append my HTTP header named as content type. And the value will be application JSON, as I'm going to send the JSON request body. Then I create another constant named as request options, which is another JSON object having method property first of all set to, you can guess it, it must be post, in the HTTP headers. So I'll just pass headers object, and then I'll set the body to JSON dot stringify department. As department is just object, it needs to be converted to JSON string and then send. Till now we have not dispatched the call to web API as yet. So here I first of all build the request by saying request const request equals new request, that takes in URL and request options, and then the actual call, where I say await fetch. Again the promise framework comes in and I pass the request object here, and then the dispatcher. So I say dispatch takes in the JSON object type, let's say represented by save department, comma the department object itself. And then the last operation which I need here is delete department. Which takes in department number.
Saket, I have a question here. What if the save department failed? What will be the, I mean, how will be shown
there will be,
there?
there will be an exception, and you can use the JavaScript exception handling here if there is an exception. And mostly that is going to be handled by dispatch. Okay, yeah, so I may have something like 500. I may have something like 404. I may have some bad requests like 500 series error. So I just need to take care of that in dispatch.
Okay, got it.
So that is a standard practice. Yeah.
I have one more question. What is the use of this get state, the second parameter we are passing to the action creator?
See, here we are not using it directly. This get state is actually utilized within the dispatch. This get state actually retrieves the state of the object of this parameter and then passes it to the further dispatch method here. Right. So ultimately this will be used when the dispatched method by the name save department or fetch departments is called. So there we will be using this this method. Okay.
Okay.
So as a callback we are passing it. Okay. So department number goes in an async operation that again takes in dispatch get state represented by this operation body, where I have once again the constant defining the URL. So I just copy this, but delete department will take in additional route parameter for department number. So I put slash plus department number, the parameter which is coming in. Okay. That's the complete request URL. Then I have once again the request options to be set. So I say const request option equal to the JSON object where I have just one property to be set, that is method, and that will be set to delete. So this is HTTP delete request I am looking to create. Then the request. So here I say const request equals new request that takes in the URL and the request options object, and there goes the fetch statement. Await fetch request. Same way, if it failed, promise object will make the return data as null, and the request code will also be there, the status code, which can be taken care of by the dispatch method that we are using next. So dispatch, it's almost the same thing. So I'll just copy this stuff where I'm going to change the name of the operation being called, which will be delete department, and here instead of department I'll pass department number. So that's my component called as action creators, and then the Redux comes with something called as reducer, which actually drills down to one single object out of multiple objects being made available. So that's why it is called as reducer. If we are working with collection, reducer will work on just one single object out of that collection. So we'll configure the reducer, and wherein actually the implementation of all these methods, fetch department, save department, delete department, will be handled. So I say there is exported component represented by this constant named as reducer, takes in state and the action being invoked, set by the action creators. That goes in this JSON body, where the first thing I put is state equals to state or initial state, whichever available. So first time it will be initial state, second time onwards it will be state. So whatever is not null will be set to the state property. So that's why first time only initial state will be assigned, and after that the state gets initialized, hence it will not be a null value. So the state will directly be assigned to the state. Then I have a switch case construct. Switch based on action dot type. My first case is fetch departments. This is where we are giving the handlers for those methods. If it is fetch departments being invoked, what needs to be done goes here. So I say read the state first. Should be comma here. It's an object. And this also goes inside return. Return. And in that I say the first property is state. The second property is departments. That is set to action dot departments. And from where this action dot departments is coming, just look at this. Dispatch type fetch departments, so case is matched here and departments from here is taken and put as the value of the action dot departments property, which gets assigned to the state. Then I say string becomes false. Then errors again becoming empty. Why empty? Because I'm assuming that my operation will be always successful. If there is an error, I can actually get this errors object also initialized. Then I say force reload. It is false. This is for the first request. And that's my first case. Then I go for the next case, represented by save department. Again, I say return, where the first property once again is state. Second property is departments. Where I say object dot assign to this empty object action dot department. And then I say force reload true. If I've added a new element, the reload needs to be done so that the data table mapped to this UI will be reloaded and it will accommodate the newly added department object. Then comes the next case. Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, there was some disconnection, I guess, in between. So save department, have you seen that? I'm now coding for the delete department case. Hello, am I audible? Great.
Sanket,
There
I
was
can
some
hear you.
issue with the
Yes.
internet connection, I guess. Yeah, so just was checking if I'm audible clearly. So we were at save department thing. So save department is here pretty much similar to what we did with face departments, where I'm returning the state and then departments being assigned to the new object which has been created, and then force reload is true, because if we add a new department, the data table representing the list of department needs to be updated. So we say force reload is true. And something similar we are going to do with delete department as well. Let's see how delete department goes. Very similar to what we are doing here. So I'll just copy this return statement from save department, paste it here and make the necessary changes, where it is just one change in this line that I need to do. Instead of the whole department object, I will need only department number to be returned. So I say department number colon action dot department number. And the reason behind that is here we are returning the department number while making the call to dispatch. Right, so one small change I'll make here though. For save departments, it's not departments, it's department. Just a single object is there. It was a typo from my side. Okay, so this store object is ready. The next thing I need to do is where I need to handle the rendering part of my component, and that's where I need to create a React component actually, which will create the UI whenever this department component is requested. So I go to the components folder here under SRC, right click, add new item, where again I'm looking for JavaScript file. So I select ASP NET Core Web Scripts and select JavaScript file and name this as departments list. Add. Few things I'll need to import here for the React and all that stuff. And before that, I need a UI component also to be added to our project, that is Prime React. And for that reason, I'll just right click this client app folder, say open folder in File Explorer. We can see there is a package.json file also over here. Just keep this folder open, go back to Visual Studio for a while, and here let's open this package.json, and in this dependency section create a new dependency that is named as Prime React with a specific version that I'm looking for that is compatible with the current React that we are using in this project. So 3.1.2 is the version. This is a UI component, open source component that gives me nice looking data tables and buttons and text boxes and all that UI component stuff, where I don't need to actually build everything right from the scratch by using HTML stuff and then applying the style sheet and all. This is a out of the box provided library for UI components. So once this is done, save this package.json file, close it, and go back to the File Explorer where we have opened this folder, client app, and in the address bar I'll just type cmd to open the command line at the same path, and here I say npm install to restore all the npm package dependencies. Done. To verify that this Prime React component has been added, I'll just go to this node modules folder And here let's search for prime React folder. It has been added with all the dependencies into it. And here you can see a lot of components are there: data table, captcha, button, and chart, and checkbox, and text box, and editors, list boxes, menu bars, everything. All UI elements there. And then resources folder should have the prime react.css file, its minified version, and then some themes over here which will allow us to select the color schemes and all. Okay, so this is done. I'll just close this folder. I'll close this command line as well, and back to this departments list.js component. So what all things we require here? We'll just open this fetchdata.js file. Some of the things we'll copy from here. We require React framework, we require Redux framework, we require their integration, so React Redux. Then we require, yeah, so this should be fine in fact. So I'll copy these three statements, import statements, close this file and paste it here. I've imported React component class from React library, bind action creators from Redux library, connect from React Redux, and then few more import statement to import the UI elements from that prime React component. So here I say import from prime React / data table. Now I'll put the entry within the curly brace, what exactly I'm looking to import. So I'm looking to import data table. If we complete the statement first before giving this, we get the proper IntelliSense here. So it's better. If we directly try to put something here, it won't show me anything because there is no from part of it configured as yet, from where to import. Apart from data table, I'm looking for column to represent data table columns. I'm looking for dialog class. I'm looking for input type text. I'm looking for button. I'm looking for action creators. I'm looking for another component called as growl, which is again a pop-up kind of feature. Apart from that alert box, I want to use some nice UI. So that's where the growl component comes in. So let's say from React / column class I'm looking to import from this library is column class. Likewise, few more import statements from timer React / dialog. So you can guess over here what I'm going to put and import. I'm looking for dialog class. Another import statement for input text. So I'll say from timer React / input text. If mask text box required, input mask is the one. Text area is input text area. There I say input text is the class. Next is button. So let's say import curly braces from timer React / button. The class name is sorry, button. Then looking for a nice UI for the dialog. I'm sorry again. This is named as growl, where I say from primer React / growl. and the class name also is ground. And the last import statement, I'm looking to link to the department component that we have created here. So I'll say from dot slash store, go one level back into the folder hierarchy from component, and then from there go to the store folder, and from there pick up the department component, and from there import the class called as action creators. Then goes the class departments list that represents my component, where I say extends component representing the React component, and then some React stuff going in here. So starting with constructor, which calls the base class constructor to start with, sets the state, initial state blank, and then hooks up some events. Say I'm looking for an event named as on department select, not yet created, we'll be creating it shortly, equal to this dot on department select dot bind. This bind is required because if we don't do this, the current state of department list class will not be sent to the event handler. So actually we bind the same method to itself, wherein we pass the state object as a parameter, so that this method then can utilize the current object represented by this. Same way, here I'm looking for a few more events. The next is dialog hide. So it goes the same way, this dot dialog hide dot bind this. Next is add new. So I say this dot add new. All these methods are yet to be created, will be helper methods of this class. So I'll say this dot add new dot bind this. Next is save equals this dot save dot bind this. And then the last one, this dot delete equals this dot delete dot bind this. And then there are some methods that I need to override first of all from the base class. So the first one is component did mount, which means the component loaded successfully and initialized successfully. After that, what I'm looking for is call the fetch data method from the current class, which will be actually doing the data loading, and where fetch data is ultimately linked to this department object, and where it will be actually making call to request departments method only, which is going to interact with the backend web API and get the data downloaded, and then the rendering starts. Same way, here I say there is another overloaded method, component did update. So updated successfully, that means the re-rendering has to be done, where I first of all check if this dot props dot force reload is true. Then also I need to say fetch data. If force reload is false, fetch data need not be called again, so that the server backend server communication is not needed. Right, so the method on department select, dialog hide, add new, save, delete, fetch data, all are pending. First one that I'm going to write here is fetch data, because this is where the things are starting. So I say fetch data. What ultimately it does is interacts with the departments.js file and calls the request departments object from there. So here I say this dot props, which is the state property, dot request department. So the chain now you can understand. I create one additional helper method over here, which will be required shortly. So the name is update property. This is basically to handle the change in any of the properties of the department, the state object basically. So it takes in the property itself that is being changed and the new value. Here I define a local variable by saying let department, which is equal to this dot state dot department, and then the department objects property that has been passed over here as the parameter needs to be updated to the new value which is coming here. The mapping of multiple properties I don't need to do explicitly, so this is where I have created a mapper with this helper method update property. Then I say this dot set state to the new department. So here I say the state object department is set to the current local object department. And now we'll implement all these methods one by one. On department select is the first to go. So on department select, that takes in one argument that represents the event. Here I say this dot new department equals to false. I say this dot set state to a JSON object wherein the first property I'll select is display dialog. Set to true, followed by the department object itself, where I'll use object dot assign method that we have used earlier as well. Empty object assigned to e dot data, the event object dot data property. That is on department select. Next that I'll implement is dialog hide. So I copy this. I was talking about this bind method where I'm passing this object, right? If I don't do this thing, in that case, this event object E will not be coming as initialized and I won't be able to read this value. That's why that binding is necessary as per the React rules. Dialog hide method goes now, which straight away says this dot set state the JSON object that has got a property display dialog set to false, as I'm looking to hide the dialog when this method is called. Next is add new. So I copy it from here just to avoid any typos. I'm copying it. Now what add new does is it says this dot new department equals to true. This dot, in fact, I can copy it from here. This dot set state. Display dialog is going to be true, and department object is going to be the one that I set explicitly over here. So I say department number. If it is a new record requirement, so I want to set the values to the default values. So I'll say department number 0, dname colon empty string comma location colon empty string. So that is add new. What's pending now is save and delete. So the next one I'll implement is the save method. There I say this dot props, that is the state object, dot save, which is this method actually. If save department, I'll say, and I pass the current object where I say this dot state dot department. Then I say this dot dialog hide. Operation completed, so dialog needs to be hidden. This dialog is basically a pop-up dialog which will allow me to do the new entries or edit the existing entries or delete the existing entries. So it's a custom pop-up dialog that I'm creating. Then I say this dot null dot show. This is basically to replace the alert. What I want to show is represented by a JSON object where I say severity is the first property set to success. So this severity value will decide the background color of my alert box, custom alert box, which will be represented. Next is detail, which is actually the description text that will be displayed into it. So here I say the value depends on this dot new department value. If it is true, there is different text. If it is false, there is different text. New department means new department being added, and new department false means existing department being edited. So if new department is true, I'll use ternary operator. For the true part, I'll say display data saved successfully. And if it is new department false, that means it's an edit request. I'll show the message as data updated successfully, as we have merged the save and update operation. Remember, semicolon not required here as it's a JSON object property. So this is save. The next and the last thing which is required here is the delete method. So I say delete. What this does is simply says this dot props dot delete department, which is this method that I'm looking to call, wherein what it is asking is department number parameter. I need to pass that. So here I say this dot state dot department number. Then I say this dot dialog hide. The pop-up dialog gets hidden, and again the scroll comes in. So I'll just copy this dot scroll dot show with severity as error. Not the error actually I want to display, it is the delete operation. That's why I want the background of the dialog to be red, hence severity error, which will set that background to red. And detail will be a simple string, data deleted successfully. Okay, now the most important part is still pending, that is the rendering. We have not done anything about rendering the UI. So here goes my render method. Before we proceed, if you have any questions regarding this implementation, please ask. Yes, anybody? Okay, so I assume there are no questions, and let's proceed. So render method is something which will decide what will be displayed actually on the screen. Some HTML stuff needs to be coded here. So it starts with declaring a local variable named as header that actually sets up the header for me, h1 element kind of thing. So I say it is equal to some HTML. So div/div. Within this div, I'm looking to have some bootstrap class used. So I say class name equals to p clearfix. This is a predefined bootstrap class, and as I said, bootstrap is already enabled for the project. I want some inline style as well to be used. So here I say style equals to line height 1.87 m, and the text to be displayed goes in between div. So I say CRUD, or departments is the title that should be displayed as header. I could have used h1 also directly. I decide the footer also. So I say let footer equals to div/div, just like header. This also goes with the class name prefix. Class name clearfix, not prefix. Style equals width colon 100%. I want to occupy the whole available space for this div. And the content. What it contains is a button object which is coming from that UI framework that we have added, Primer React. It should be with capital B so that the button class is imported, which we have taken over here. So it refers to that. Say button has got style of its own. Float colon left. This is all CSS stuff. Nothing special. Then button has label, that is the text to be displayed on button. I'll say it is add. Want an icon also to be displayed on it. So here I say icon is equals to, again taking from Bootstrap, I'll say pi plus. And want to handle its click event. So where I say on click equals to, I'll bind this to add new method that we've created. So here I say this dot add new. And closing for button. So this is my footer. Next, I create the footer for the dialog, the pop-up dialog. So here I say let dialog footer is equals to div / div this div also gets a class. So I say class name equals set of Bootstrap class. I'll put UI dialog button pane along with p clear fix. What this dialog footer contains is series of buttons. Maybe I can copy this button thing. Price over here, as I said, series of buttons. So 3 buttons I'm looking for. There is no style for this button. So I delete the style. The label here I'm looking for is close. Icon I'm looking for is pi times. On click, I want to go to dialog hide. Next button, again no style. Default style I will be happy with. The label is going to be delete. I'll set one more property over here for this button, that is disabled. And this will depend on whether it's a new department or not. So expression where I say this dot new department, which is a Boolean property. If it is true, then return true, else return false. So disabled will be true or false based on the value of new department. Then icon, again pi times. On click, I want to handle delete. And then the third button where I say there is no style for this as well. The label is save. In fact, not save, it should be save or update. So I'll say it is based on an expression based on this dot new department again. If it is true, then the label should be saved. It should be question mark here, else it should be update. Okay, then icon pi check is what I am going to use here. On click, this dot save method I will bind here, and then goes the return statement. Watch this carefully. This is going to be little complex HTML. combine this HTML stuff also what we have created on top. In fact, to simplify this return statement, we have put this. Otherwise, we could have done all this stuff and inside return also. So it all starts with a div element. Div/div. The first thing that I define here is growl object with G capital. Ref property is set to an expression L that goes in this dot growl equals to element. Self-closing. Then I define the data table instance to render the tabular view for my departments collection. So I say data table value equals to this dot props dot departments and then I said selection mode equals to single, so that one record at a time can be selected. I set its header to the header variable that we have set on the top. I set it to the footer that we have set. Then I set the selection property to this dot selected department. And then I bind the on selection changed event here. Another expression where the event itself is represented by E goes in. This dot state. This dot set state, in fact. Where in parentheses, curly braces, I say selected department colon E dot value. And then I said on row select event, bind it to this dot on department select. And then here I go with slash data table, the end tag. So in between I need to set up the columns as well. That's why I'm not using the self-closing tag here. And here then I go with column definition. So my first column goes here, column that binds the field represented by department number with header it has department number like this, self-closing for column. Then I have the next column which binds to the field dname with header as name and the last column, as we have just 3 properties, that binds to the field location, header as location. Header is the text to be displayed, right? So that is data table. Now what we need to configure is the dialog, which will be used as the pop-up box. So I say dialog, set its visible property to an expression based on this dot state dot display dialog. If display dialog is true, it will be displayed. If it is false, it will not, it will be hidden. Set the style property to width colon, let's say 380 pixel, depends how wide you want this data table to be and how many fields actually you are showing. So you can decide based on that. Then comes the header property, which is set to department details. Whether I want to show this as model dialog or modeless dialog. So I set the model property. It is not set, or if this is set to false, it is modeless. But if I'm setting it to true, it is model. I set the footer property to dialog footer, set on the top earlier. I want to handle its hide event, so I say on hide equals expression, no parameter goes in, this dot set state display dialog false. And close the tag. This on hide still continues, where I say this dot state, curly brace in fact, and after this there will be slash dialog. In between curly brace, I'll say this dot state dot department and some HTML. Div class name equals to there will be slash div. The class that I'm looking to implement here is a bootstrap class named as pgrid fluid. Design stuff. Here I have another div slash div. This div contains a label. So here I say label HTML4. This is HTML5 thing. I'm looking to create this label for field named as dname. This dialog will not show department number as it is auto number identity column. And the text to be displayed is name. Next, I have another div where I'm going to create the input text. So here goes input text object. Again, the primer React element. I set the ID to dname. I handle its change event. So say on change equals to then this dot update property dname with the target value as e dot target dot value and value itself set as, in fact it will be bound to the dname property of the state. So this dot state dot department dot dname is what I'll bind and self close. I'll copy this entire div from here and paste it below it. The next div now is having this class. Actually, I'll say this is okay. I made a mistake here. I just undo this portion. I need to copy, not the complete div, as it will be the part of this main div itself. So here I say div, which will have its own style. That's it. Padding top. To 10 pixel. Has got a label into it with HTML for location. And the text to be displayed is location. And then we have div for input text, ID as location. On change, this goes the same way, just here the field name changes to location. The rest remaining the same here. One last change that we need here is this location. So that's all the rendering part. And few last things to be done where we need to map the UI to the properties and all. So outside the class, here I create a function named as map state to props. As we have used props, we have used state, but we have not given any binding between them. So that's what this function is going to do. So here I say map state to props state. And what it does is it says departments colon state dot departments dot departments. Next, okay, this has to go in return statement as it's a function. So I'll say return a JSON object wherein I have department set to state.departments.departments. Loading is set to state.departments.loading. Errors is set to state.departments.errors, where the first departments after state is representing the component. So state.departments.errors. The last property that we have here, departments, loading, errors, these are all properties. There should be comma here. There is comma here as well. And then I have one last property here, that is force reload. That will be bound to state.departments.force reload. So that is mapping, and then there is another component that we require here for making the connections. So we say export default connect. This connect is going to connect to the component departments list. As this map state to properties will not work on its own. For that we need this function connect, where we say connect takes in the first parameter as this name, map state to properties, and then calls the dispatcher for it. So we say dispatch, which ultimately goes in and says bind action creators. We have created action creators method in department object here, so that we will bind here. So let's say action creators, and the dispatch object itself needs to be passed as callback, and this all will be mapping to departments list. So now here what we are doing is, this is all the integration part that we have coded here with these two functions. Different components we have created, classes we have created. These two functions are combining or integrating them all together. Okay, so almost done with the core functionality. Now there is a file here called as configure store, by default added with the create React app. Let's open that. Here you can see there is a constant reducers configured. There is one reducer configured for counter. There is one reducer configured for weather forecast, which are the sample implementations. We have to do exactly same thing for our own component as well. So here I say departments colon department should be with capital, as this refers to this department.js reducer, where we are actually mapping to the reducer function that we have created here. No more changes required in this file. Now go to layout.js, which is also added by default under components. What we have to do is we have to map that primer React theming framework over here by saying import //. We want to reach to the root, that is the client app folder. In that, my implementation is under node_modules. Basically, the file that I'm looking for is what we have there in. Let me go to the project folder, D drive demos / RxDemo CRUD, client app, node modules. Under that we have primer React resources. This is the file I'm looking to bind. Okay, so what I put is node modules slash primer. It's prime React actually, not primer React. Slash resources slash prime React dot CSS. Once the development is done, you are looking to host the application, deploy the application, you can map to prime react.min.js min.css also. And then I want to bind to the theme also. So once again, the path is pretty much the same till resources. I'll copy this path. After that, there is themes, and out of available 6-7 themes, I'm looking for the theme named as Nova Dark. You can choose anyone out of the available themes, and there I say theme.css. This is layout. No more changes required. Already the UI stuff is configured here. Then there is a file called as app.js, which sets up the routes for your applications to work smoothly. So here I define my own route. Will trigger the departments component. So here I say route path equals to slash departments. This should be in quotes. Whenever the request comes to the base address slash departments, it should be handled by the React component named as departments list. So by default, it puts the import statement here. This should be equal. Okay. So by default, import statement is there. Either you put this first and then put the route, or you put the route and you refer to the departments list, automatically the import statement comes in. One and the same thing. And then the last thing that we require here to make everything work is update the nav menu.js file to create the menu option for our department list component. So I copy this last nav item here, paste it back as the last nav item, and make necessary changes. Nav link tag equals to link, that's okay. Class name TextDark is okay too. Now here I need to give the route which we have configured in app.js. So that was departments. I say slash departments, and here I name this as departments. That's it. Your application is ready, and now what is pending is we just need to test this. So save everything, build the solution. Succeeded. I'll just say Control F5. React development server initially takes some time to load, to start up. But once loaded, after that you make any changes into the client side stuff and it just works. Okay, most likely there is some typo mistake. Departments list.js unexpected token expected, line number 106. Let's go and fix it. Line number 106. Yeah, so here I have missed the equal to. Save this. As this is client-side code only, I don't need to change or restart the server. It should reload on its own. one more error on line 118. Let's fix that. Yeah, the same error. Here I have missed equal to. Save this. This should automatically refresh, which it does. Okay, now there is another mistake in configure store line number 11. The binding departments colon department.reducer is not working. This is the line where we have the issue. This should have worked. Department, just check the names. And here it is reducer only. Slightly the import statement. Yeah, import is missing. So this file is not able to locate that. So we'll put import. Happens usually along with the discussion, the code is getting typed. So sometimes we miss such things. So let's put import asterisk as department from /department. So we have linked these two files and this should be resolved now. Let's save and this should be automatically refreshed. Now here it is on again. Okay. Now it's still refreshing. Uh-oh. Line number 27. This should be working as we have not modified this. What could be the issue? Just give me a moment, I'll check it thoroughly if something is missed here. Reducer I need to check practically. Action type, fetch departments, return state, departments, action departments, loading false, errors, blank. Let me check this. Using departments everywhere. This could be a culprit. Initial state is like this. Departments blank, loading false, errors, force reload. So state is state or initial state. Departments loading false, errors, force reload, save department, not assign, force reload, true. Delete department number, action, department number, force reload true, default, yeah. So I missed this. Return state. If this, yep. So that was the issue. Probably here it should be department only then. Yes. So save operation automatically triggers the refresh here. I click on departments menu here. Oh, there is another mistake here. Auto completion didn't work. This dot state dot display dialog, it should be line number 106 in departments list. Line number 106. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't work the way how we want. I just save this. This gets refreshed. My existing data gets loaded. I want to add a new record here. The pop-up comes. Here I say add marketing, location as Mumbai. Click on save, delete is disabled. See, as this is a new record, it's getting added. This is the scroll effect, that green dialog which came up, small pop-up, automatically hidden after some time. Then I click on this record, the pop-up comes back here and I can see the existing data. I want to change the location to something else, which I do and say update. It gets updated. I see the scroll here and then I click again. I select delete and it gets deleted and the scroll with the red background automatically comes. So this is basically the fully functional application, right? Minor mistakes, typo mistakes are likely to happen, especially as I said, I'm doing it along with the description of the code that we are doing, so very likely, but those are just the typo mistakes which we rectified quickly and it just started working. So any questions from your side now? Yes, guys. You can use chat box also. Fully functional CRUD application we have created. There were 3 different features that we have used. The backend server stuff we have implemented with the help of Web API using .NET Core 2.2 framework. Not very big difference as such when it comes to .NET Framework 3.1. Just the latest versions we will be using. As far as the server side is concerned, nothing changes over there, nothing major changes over there. Yeah, with the Redux template that we have with Visual Studio for .NET Core 3.1, one major change that you will see is your sample also gets created based on Typescript. So whatever implementation we have made using JavaScript based on ECMA script 6, we have to implement the same thing using Typescript in .NET Core 3.1 project template. Logic doesn't change, the implementation doesn't change, it is just the language instead of JavaScript, you will be using TypeScript there. So not very difficult. And there are a lot of tutorials available on migrating JavaScript projects to TypeScript projects as well. So more or less, this is the structure. These are the things which we will be doing. These are the features and components that we will be using for working with React and Redux together. Redux is making the life easier while implementing the complex communication with our backend services and maintaining the state, especially the complex state, into a very complex business application. Okay, so that's the summary of this particular session. Now, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Meanwhile, I'll just share the link for the online feedback. It will take hardly 1 minute, not more than that. This guy is waiting for your questions. Yes, we will be sharing the recording of this session in a week's time, as this recording needs to be processed and cleaned up. And then we will be sharing it with you. Just drop an email to the invite that you have received. Just reply back to that and I'll be sharing the recording. I mean, the link will be shared. You can just download and use it.
Yes, Saket, could we get that like source code for this solution?
Yeah, source code you will get in next 1 hour. Again, just reply to the same invite mail asking for the same. My colleague Ms. Preeti will get in touch with you to share the source code.
Thank you.
Within the same mail, you can ask for the recording as well as the demo code. Demo code you will get right away today itself. As I said, in next 1 hour you will get it, and the recording will take some time. As I said, it needs to be processed and cleaned.
Yeah, got it.
Actually,
okay, so just sharing the feedback link in the chat box. I hope you have enjoyed the session and find it useful.
Hi, Saki.
Yeah.
Hi,
Yeah,
Saki.
yeah, now it's better. Actually, your voice was not coming.
Okay. So actually, I was saying, I think none of us would have the permission to send email to, out of the organization. So
Okay.
I think we won't be able to send a reply on that mail which we received from, right? So
Can you do that from your personal email ID?
personal email ID. Okay, but we don't have that email on our personal mail ID.
Okay. Do one thing then. Just drop your email IDs into the chat box itself. I'll ask Preeti to get back to you by referring to this meetings chat.
It would be great if you can communicate to her that if she can share the code and link on the same mail which she sent to us for the invite.
I'll do that.
We all get the recording as well as source code on the same.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks. Saki.
Source code you will get in next 1 hour. The recording will be available in 1 week's time. Okay.
Okay. No, not an issue. Yeah. that would be great. Thanks, Saket.
So I hope you enjoyed the session, by the way.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, just put that link into the chat box for the feedback. Please go ahead and fill the feedback.
Sure.
Shouldn't take much time.
Okay, sure.